Most of us don't think about food safety until something goes wrong. The other week, my husband and I were planning to make pizza at home, and it was all going well until he stopped and noticed a Pecorino Romano recall on his newsfeed. We paused and went, wait, we were literally about to put Pecorino on our pizza. Is it even safe to use right now? And that moment, that pause, is something I think we've all had. Because food safety isn't just about recalls or where our food comes from. It's also about the little questions we ask ourselves in the kitchen, almost without thinking.
What temperature should the hamburgers be?
Are these leftovers still okay to eat?
Do you think the steak is cooked all the way?
Can I thaw this in the microwave?
Wasn't that recalled?
How old is this salad?
Should I wash my fruits?
Behind every one of those questions is likely a science-backed answer to keep your food safe from the grocery store to your kitchen table. And before any of your food enters your home, there's an entire ecosystem most of us never see. Scientists, regulators, farmers, distributors, and inspectors working to keep your food safe and informing us if anything has gone wrong long before it reaches our homes.
15 federal agencies, plus state agencies, oversee our food system. The USDA regulates meat, poultry, eggs, and, weirdly, catfish. The FDA covers about everything else.
While that system is vast, today we're focusing on the everything else with FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. Our guest is Dr. Conrad Choiniere, Director of the FDA Human Foods Program, Office of Microbiological Food Safety. Conrad has spent more than 20 years at the FDA studying consumer behavior, working across the food supply chain, and helping shape how the agency spots and prevents foodborne illnesses before it happens. This is Empathy Affect, the Forest Marsh Media podcast that explores the human side of government. I'm Melissa Sosinski, and today, Conrad explains why fresh produce is uniquely challenging when it comes to food safety, how recalls actually work, what the FDA does to protect food as it moves from farm to table, and what all of us can do at home to lower risk. And if you're like me, without overthinking every meal. Dr. Choiniere, welcome to Empathy Affect. I'm super excited to chat with you today about one of my favorite things, food, but just as importantly, how the FDA keeps food safe long before it reaches our tables, and what all of us can do at home to lower risk. It's wonderful to have you today.
Thank you for having me. Very happy to be here.
Yeah. So when people think about food safety, they might often think about things like meat or what they eat in restaurants. But many of us are trying to eat healthier, especially more fruits and vegetables with the new dietary guidelines, New Year's resolutions to be healthy, and so forth. So let's start here with produce. What kinds of food safety issues do people need to be aware of when it comes to produce?
Fresh produce certainly is an important part of a healthy diet, and we want people to eat more of it. But one concept that folks need to understand, unlike a lot of foods, there's no what we call a kill step with fresh produce, meaning there's no step along the way, when you're growing it or processing it or at the store or even in the home, where you are doing something to it that might kill the bacteria that are on it. So we don't cook it, we don't pasteurize it, there's no heat treatment. In fact, a kill step is not desired. No one wants to have a boiled iceberg salad, right? So people will rinse and you can remove the dirt, but even rinsing won't take off any bacteria that happens to be there. So it's important at every stage of the production of fresh produce to take the steps, and even in the home to take steps to make sure that we don't accidentally put bacteria on the product, or we don't give a chance for the bacteria to grow.
Yeah.
So like thinking about making sure you wash your hands and before you handle that produce, and making sure you're putting it in the fridge if it was refrigerated when you bought it.
That's a fair point. No one wants warm cucumber, warm lettuce. So those are great tips. But diving deeper into that, over time, I know we've seen recalls involving leafy greens and other produce. What's important for people to understand behind those recalls, and what makes, just diving deeper, produce like we said before, lettuce, cucumbers, or other veggies we eat raw more vulnerable?
If I can start with the second part of that, why is produce more vulnerable? We have to remember how produce is produced. It grows in fields. It isn't made in a sterile factory. So there's the soil, there's water, the air, and bacteria just are naturally found in those conditions. In the field, growers will take steps to ensure that they're not accidentally introducing other bacteria, making sure that they're practicing good hygiene. The people that are picking the fruit, for instance, and the vegetables, or doing anything else, like making sure that they put the produce after its harvest on ice before it goes to the packing house. But then there's a lot of steps that happen between the field and by the time it gets to the home. And so at every step, there needs to be processes in place to make sure that people are handling it properly, that there's good hygiene, good temperature control so that we don't have that contamination. A lot of the recalls that you hear about are not related to someone getting sick. Oftentimes, these are somewhere along the way, along that supply chain, someone identified a problem. Someone identified maybe there was an equipment failure or maybe there was a process breakdown. It was identified through testing or through some review. And so the firm will recall the product proactively just to make sure that the product doesn't make anyone sick. So often you can think of recalls sometimes as being a good thing. It means that the system is working, not that the system is not working, that food producers are actually doing the right thing to protect the consumers. We do have those unfortunate recalls, though, that occur because someone got sick.
Yeah. I like the way of reframing our mind around that. Sometimes when I hear about recalls, I get a little freaked out. Like, oh my, like I remember my husband was talking to me the other day about a Pecorino Romano recall. And he was like, have you bought any recently? We're making pizza this weekend. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't know. But it's good to know that, a lot of it is caught early before it even reaches the shelves or our homes.
Yeah, and in that recall in particular, that was the firm found the problem and decided to take the steps to recall that product.
Yeah. Super good to know. While we were still on the topic of fruits, veggies, and healthy food, though, how does the FDA think about the balance between encouraging healthy eating and making sure the food people rely on is safe?
I will say that many of us in the agency think about it all the time. We are encouraging folks to eat a lot of these fresh foods. And so our primary goal is to make sure the public is safe and that people aren't getting sick from those fresh foods. But we also need to ensure that those fresh and healthy foods are available and accessible. So we at least try to consider the impacts of the regulations that we put on the growers and manufacturers, as well as the actions that we might take on the potential supply or the cost of making those foods. But by erring on the side of safety, we can ensure that consumers have that confidence they need to eat the healthy, whole, fresh foods we want them to consume. We know that consumers are not eating enough fresh produce, not consuming enough dairy and seafood. These are all healthy foods. So we are making sure that we are working with those producers as well as our state partners to keep those foods safe while also keeping that production going.
Yeah, those are great points. And I can't help but note, just getting to know you, that you spent much of your career at FDA in consumer and social science. So I'd love to dig a little deeper there, learn more about how those experiences inform what you do with the Human Foods Program. Could you share more about how these experiences earlier in your career shape how you think about risk prevention and public trust today with food safety?
Sure. So I have an interesting path to FDA. Going way back, I grew up on a dairy farm, but I was trained as an economist. And then I spent many of my earlier years at FDA as a social scientist. And so this has definitely provided me a different perspective than many of the colleagues that I have at FDA. Much of my work with consumers has been in terms of research, looking at surveys, fielding surveys, doing focus groups, for instance, looking at a wide range of issues, whether they were related to food or other products. And this has helped me understand that the consumers think about things much differently than the average FDA employee. We inside the agency have a lot of knowledge about how the products we regulate are manufactured and how they're produced that consumers don't necessarily have. And so we understand where many of the risks are in the production of these products and have a greater appreciation of the challenges that there can be to try to keep these products safe. As an economist and having grown up on a farm, it's given me the perspective of thinking about the growers and how what we do at FDA can have an impact on their livelihood. If we put in rules that are not feasible for them to follow or unduly expensive, we run the risk of putting them out of business. So it goes back to the other question you asked, like weighing the access to these healthy foods against the safety issues. Although I've been with the agency since 2003, only about 16 of those years have I worked on food safety and nutrition. There was a 7-year period right in the middle of my tenure where I worked on tobacco issues. And it's very different thinking about FDA's approach with tobacco as opposed to with foods. Part of it's because of the laws that we have that govern our authorities over these products, but much of it is about the products themselves. So you're thinking about foods, your baseline expectation is this food is safe. And so that then our question is, well, what can we do to ensure that it remains safe? But with tobacco, the baseline is often this product is unsafe. So then FDA's role is kind of what can we do to make it less risky to consumers? And there the approach is harm reduction as opposed to prevention, and making it easier for people to quit, for instance, or making products or allowing products that are less harmful. So that, when I came back to foods, that really colored my perspective in terms of how we look at foods and how we talk about them, and realizing that maybe that underlying expectation that this food is safe can't be assumed, that there is some risk in all foods and something can happen to it anywhere.
That's so true. I think, people know that tobacco can be, it's dangerous. They think about it in ways like that. I think that sometimes we take for granted where our food comes from. And I love your background, coming from a dairy farm and coming to FDA, you really you kind of resemble farm to table in that kind of way in terms of your knowledge and perspective. Having this long-term view, being at FDA for so long, seeing how the science, the risks, and the systems have evolved, as I was just saying, it gives you this perspective that many may not have at FDA or, just in everyday life. So for listeners who may not know the history, can you walk us through how FDA's food program evolved into what's now the Human Foods program and why that shift mattered?
Sure. A few years back, we went through a big reorg. Really, it was 2024 when it became effective. But prior to that reorganization, the folks that worked on food safety issues, for instance, were spread over 3 or 4 different parts of the agency. And you had multiple leaders. And so it wasn't always clear who was on first. It wasn't clear for our stakeholders who they should be reaching out to within the agency to get issues resolved. And it led to some inefficiencies and maybe some issues in terms of how we were responding to issues. So the reorganization brought all of the food safety and nutrition folks within one single entity now, what we call the Human Foods Program. And we have one leader, the Deputy Commissioner for Human Foods. So this one person is it's where the buck stops. As far as food is concerned, people know who's making the decisions. It has helped us speak with one voice and be clear about our vision. Our vision, by the way, is to make sure that food is a source of wellness for all consumers. By thinking about wellness, we're thinking about both nutrition and safety. And it's also helped with thinking about ourselves as a risk management organization and being more effective with prioritizing our efforts and targeting the resources toward those areas of greatest risk to the food supply.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Speaking of the food supply chain, this time of year, it's really cold. We're not growing a lot of things locally. So I'm thinking about where my food's coming from sometimes. What does it actually take to get produce or things grown in a place like Florida that's much warmer than most of the country today to tables across the country or even across borders? And what are the biggest food safety risks along that journey?
Sure. And thinking about this time of year, living in the Northern Hemisphere, we're getting a lot of our produce from other countries, right? I think we get something like 30% of our fresh produce from Mexico.
Wow.
We get a significant amount of fresh produce from other countries in South America, such as Chile and others. So it's a long way for fresh produce to travel before it gets to your home. So all along the way, I mentioned it before, like there are steps at every point where risk can occur. So you have the field where the food has been grown, the risks that are posed from the soil and the environment, as well as thinking about how those growers are and harvesters are handling the equipment that's used to harvest it or to transport it, the transportation from that equipment from that field to a packing house or some intermediary place where we need to ensure that, for instance, if we're talking leafy greens, we want to make sure that it's properly chilled and then held in a cool environment. It can go from there to a processing step, thinking about bag salads so that the fresh produce remains fresh, but it needs to be cut and maybe mingled with other produce into a salad mix. There's all that equipment that's involved there. And then it goes into another storage and transportation step to potentially another warehouse or another form of transportation to eventually get to the store. Then you have the stores need to ensure good handling and temperature. So there's a lot of individual steps, all can pose risks along the way, whether it's the water or the handling of the food. And so before it even gets to the household, there have been FDA has had a lot of input in terms of how it should be handled. But once it gets to the household, the consumer has a role. We don't regulate the household. Consumer needs to take the same or similar steps, thinking about hygiene, temperature control, and ensuring that there's no introduction of bacteria from other parts of the kitchen.
Yeah, I mean, just putting it like that, next time I pull my arugula that's been 3 times washed, perfectly packaged out of the fridge, I'm gonna be thanking all the people who helped to get there.
I'm not a
Speaking
big
of,
fan of arugula.
oh, that's okay. Everyone has their preferences. Lettuce, spinach, arugula, whatever. So, since there's so many steps along the way to make sure that, it's safe once it gets into our home or to, from to the grocery store, how does FDA work with the growers, with the distributors, and all those international partners to really reduce those risks? Even though, you're setting the rules, how do you collaborate with them?
Yeah, so and with the new reorg that I've talked about with the new think about ourselves as a risk management organization, we're taking a more proactive approach in terms of being more collaborative with industry and thinking about how we have a shared goal. Although the industry is producing the food and we're regulating the production of that food, we all ultimately want consumers to have safe food to eat. Nobody wants to have a big expensive recall. Nobody wants to be part of an outbreak. And so thinking about how we can better work with industry to ensure that those types of accidents don't happen. We at the agency have limited bandwidth. We have the regulatory expertise, we have the scientific expertise, but we can't possibly have all of the expertise related to the production of food. We don't make it on a day-by-day basis. There are so different types of processes, so many different types of commodities and foods that are produced that we need to think about how best to collaborate with industry to tailor the rules that we have into best practices that a specific type of grower can implement or a production facility can implement that align with our regulations while being much more practical and feasible for them.
Yeah, it goes back to what you were saying before about being fair for the folks doing the legwork to get the food. You want to make sure their livelihoods are protected, but also working with them to make sure that the regulations are working and that you can make systems that align for them. Yeah. So right now I want to switch gears for a minute. We've talked a lot about food safety, a bit about FDA's role, but people have all sorts of questions around food, what's safe, what's not safe once the food is in their house. So let's do a quick lightning round on common food safety questions people ask all the time. No tricks, no judgment, just myth versus reality. Okay. So number 1, should you wash raw chicken before cooking it?
No, you shouldn't wash raw chicken or any meat. You run the risk of splattering the germs that are on the chicken all over your kitchen. Even worse, might splatter onto the salad you're making next door.
Gotta protect my arugula.
Right.
Number 2, how long is it actually safe to leave food out at room temperature?
Official recommendation, 2 hours. It's possible that some foods can stay out longer, like acidic foods, I've heard can withstand longer time at room temperature, but I'm not a food scientist. Most of us are not food scientists, so it gets too complicated to try and figure that out. So I would say 2 hours.
Better safe than sorry.
Better safe than sorry.
3, is rinsing fruits and veggies enough to make them safe?
As I said earlier, no. If you're eating them raw, no. If you're cooking them, well, in any case, rinsing fruits and veggies, rinsing any food will not get rid of any bacteria that's on it if it is there. So you can either cook it or just make sure that you have handled it properly in a way that doesn't cause the bacteria to grow. Because if you don't refrigerate something, any bacteria that's there will just grow more, or done something like contaminated with dirty hands.
Noted. Okay. 4, what's the biggest cross-contamination mistake people make in the kitchen?
Washing raw chicken. No, I mean, it's I think it's cross-contamination. I don't know if anyone knows for sure, but cross-contamination such as I described with meat, accidentally touching the meat to a place where you're putting raw vegetables. Want to make sure that you're separating things, that you're keeping things clean, and you're keeping your hands clean so that you don't have that cross-contamination.
Fair enough. Okay. 5, for the raw cookie dough eaters out there, is it really unsafe to eat raw flour or dough?
It is definitely risky. We have seen outbreaks with it. Remember, I used a term earlier called the kill step. There's no kill step. You're eating raw cookie dough. So raw eggs are obvious to everyone. There's no kill step. But most people don't realize that flour that you use to bake at home, that hasn't gone through a kill step either. It might look like it's been cooked, but it hasn't been. So the flour itself can also present a risk. And when you mix it all together, you're giving the bacteria all those nutrients to grow and multiply, and then you can get sick.
Gonna have to break it to my husband. He loves cookie dough. Okay. Do people really need to use a food thermometer for meat?
So it's definitely highly recommended. And I would think if you're a less experienced cook, you should definitely be using them. Some folks, as they get more experience, you have a better understanding about like the temperature and the time you need to follow in order to make sure it's cooked safely. But even then, someone like me who is fairly experienced, I will still time to time use that thermometer just to verify that my instincts are correct.
Fair enough. Do Best By and Sell By dates mean food is unsafe after the date?
Nope. It depends. I mean, if the package has been open, then you definitely want to probably think twice. But if it hasn't been opened and the can looks good, it's not bulging or anything, or the packaging isn't damaged, then it's still safe to eat. That date on there is about quality, not safety. So the quality might not be good. So at that point, you just want to look at it. You can smell it. You can taste it before deciding whether to toss it.
Gotcha. And lastly, how long can leftovers safely stay in the fridge?
The rule of thumb, I believe, is 3 to 5 days. Personally, what I do is if it's a restaurant, it's more closer to 3 because, again, there's more people that have handled the food, more opportunity for that risk hazard to be introduced. And if I've cooked it myself, maybe closer to 5 days. USDA may have an app. There are plenty of apps out there that can tell you.
Gotcha. I know I said lastly, but should you put your food away when it's still hot or wait for it to cool?
It's okay to put the food away when it's hot. It all depends though on your fridge, right? So if you put a huge pot of really hot soup in your fridge and you have a small fridge, then you run the risk of heating everything else up in your fridge. But generally speaking, it's okay to put warm food in to cooling temperature as soon as possible.
Good to know. That's one I personally struggle with. I'm like, I gotta wait for it to cool. But sometimes that could be the 2 hours, you know? Okay, these lightning round questions were awesome to think about for the everyday person, but sometimes I think about, the people who are more vulnerable. So, how should households think differently about food safety when they have young children, older adults, or immunocompromised family members? Are there foods or practices that matter more in those situations?
The way I look at it is that you have to remember that your food could pose a risk to yourself, right? And whatever risk that food poses to you is greatly magnified or amplified to someone that's a young child or an older adult or someone with an compromised system, right? So thinking about that raw cookie dough that your husband likes, I don't know if you have young children or you have your elderly relative or someone that's going through cancer treatment, you might not get sick, but one of those individuals could get sick of that raw cookie dough. The dose is not the same in terms of thinking about how much bacteria do you have to eat to get sick. It all depends on the strength of your immune system, right? So you, a young healthy adult, might be able to eat that raw cookie dough and feel no ill effects. A young child may get seriously ill.
Yeah, that checks out. I know we've covered a lot of ground today, but if listeners have to remember just 2 or 3 food safety habits from this conversation, what should they walk away with?
So thinking back on some of the things we talked about already, you started out talking about recalls. So I think it's important that people pay attention to recalls when they hear about them. If you have a product in your fridge or pantry that matches the recall, and when I say match, you mentioned the Romano cheese earlier. Looking at the lot, we will not just recall Romano cheese. It will say the brand, it'll say the lot number, it will tell you, there would be pictures on the webpage showing you where to look for the information on the package. And you can verify whether or not the product you have in your fridge or in your pantry has been recalled or not. So I urge people to actually pay attention, take a look, and if your product matches, then throw it away or bring it to the store you bought it from. So that's one. The other one, it's not really one, it's really 4 in 1. There's a basic advice in the home, thinking about clean, separate, cook, and chill. It gets back at thinking about making sure your environment that you're cooking your foods in, your hands are clean, making sure you're keeping things separate so you don't get that cross-contamination between meat and vegetables, making sure you cook things that are intended to be cooked, and then chilling soon after you're done eating. And I guess the last one is keep eating those healthy foods. It's a lot riskier to live a life without eating those foods than it is with them. So we know that people that don't eat fresh produce and other healthy foods are at much greater risk of chronic disease. And so we want to make sure people keep eating them.
So true. And thanks to the FDA, we could be pretty confident that, the foods that get recalled don't get to us. They'll be caught ahead of time. And you guys are doing the work to help make sure we can eat my arugula for you, whatever your salad green is. So I really appreciate it. Conrad, this has been so incredibly helpful and honestly reassuring. I think a lot of people will walk away feeling more confident about they handle food at home. So I just wanted to thank you for spending your career doing this very important behind the scenes work and for helping us understand how much science and care goes into keeping people safe every day.
Well, you're very welcome, and thank you for having me here.
As Conrad reminds us, so much of the work to protect consumers happens long before we ever bring food home. But the choices we make in our kitchens matter. How we store food, how we prevent cross-contamination, and how we think about risk, especially when we're cooking for kids, older folks, or people with compromised immune systems. If you take just a few things from this episode, let them be this. Eat your fruits and vegetables, understand that washing alone isn't always enough, and remember that food safety is a shared responsibility, one that stretches from the farm all the way to your fridge. You can find more information about food recalls and food safety guidance at fda.gov, and we'll link to those resources in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with someone who loves to cook, or maybe someone like my husband who's always trying to snag a bite of that cookie dough. And like and follow if you want to hear more from Empathy Affect. We hope you'll tune in next time. Thanks, y'all.
Empathy Effect is a product of Forrest Marsh. You can reach us at forrestmarshmedia@forrestmarsh.com with any feedback, questions, or inquiries. If you want to know more about today's guest, are interested in participating with Forrest Marsh, or becoming part of our community, check out our show notes for more information.